I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. You are welcome to post questions for Sallie in the Q&A box below your screen, which we will get to in the second half of tonight's session. And a complete recording of the session will be available on the Stern Business and Society Program website in a couple of days. Tonight's lecture is the Sani lecture, and Ashok Sani, for whom this annual lecture is named, was a successful entrepreneur, a distinguished graduate of NYU, and the founder of NYU Stern Alumni Council, which he led. He stood for ethics, truth, compassion, and social responsibility. Sallie, you are the perfect guest for this, or honoree for the Ashok Sani lecture, because you have much in common with Ashok Sani. You are one of the few people whose career success spans startup entrepreneurship and large complex organizations. You were the CEO of Merrill Lynch, Smith Barney, US Trust, the Citi Private Bank, and Sanford Bernstein. You also were the chief financial officer for Citigroup. You live by the values of ethics, truth, compassion, and social responsibility that drove Ashok Sani. As the CEO and co-founder of Ellevest, you've made it your mission to help women reach their financial and professional goals. Ellevest itself is one of the fastest growing digital investment platforms, and it is by women and for women. You've said that by getting more money into the hands of women, we will not only enable them to live better lives, but also will unleash a positive ripple effect for our families, our communities, and our economy. In recent months, as we are building back from the global health and economic crisis, you've drawn attention to the fact that in the United States, it's women who serve as the social safety net. What do you mean by that, and how does this fit with your personal mission and your vision for Ellevest?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much to the Sani family for sponsoring this and giving me the opportunity to engage with this community. First of all, I'd love to start by saying that I don't take responsibility for that statement. It was Jessica Calarco, a sociologist, who late last year was quoted as saying, other countries have social safety nets, the US has women. And it just floored me. It just floored me because we had been lulled into a point of view that the advancement of women is happening. It's inexorable. It may go a little bit slower than we like, but here we go. And you only have to look at the fact that the majority of college graduates are women, the majority of graduate graduates are women, that, we're talking about women getting the CEO role now of Citi, of different businesses. Women are on the move. They're the largest emerging market in the world. You just can't stop this. The gender pay gap was closing. We tended to look past some of the bad news. So for all that the gender pay gap, the 82 cents that a woman earns to a white man's dollar, was slowly moving in the right direction, we sort of ignored the fact that the more important gender wealth gap, which is the pay gap is how much money she has in, the wealth is how much she has and keeps, was actually moving in the wrong direction, was 32 cents to a white man's dollar, a penny for Black women, a penny for brown women. And so we've had 58. If you Googled gender pay gap, there were 58 million mentions. If you Googled gender wealth gap, there were only 15,000. So we tended to say, that will catch up over time. So we're on our way. And then the pandemic hit. And, when you step back, the research and things fell apart. And so where we started, when you actually step back and said, okay, the scales have fallen off my eyes, is that the research makes it clear that it's sorry to be depressing, but in order for women to be promoted at work, for people of color to be promoted at work, there is a higher bar than for men. White men. White men are today, before the pandemic, promoted based on potential. Others are promoted based on achievement. So there's a higher bar. There was also, that damned if you do, damned if you don't. In order to hit that higher bar, not just through achievement, but through what one exuded at work, a woman had to be not too soft, not too hard, not too much like your mom, not too much like a shrew, but somewhere in the middle. When she went home, she's doing 2 times the house care and 3 times the child care. And so her day is full. And, you should have realized how close we were to sort of falling off the edge when you actually think about how even the little things add up for us, that women are expected to show up for work with a certain gravitas. For us, that means hair and makeup, something men don't have to deal with. We have to look a certain way. We have to appear a certain way. And so when I was CFO of Citi, I remember being on a trip down in Central America, South America. I was a senior person there, all men with me. And we'd wake up early to get on the flight for to go from Argentina to Brazil. And the men would say, oh, I just woke up. And I'd be like, I've been up for 1 hour. 1 hour. And if it only takes you 15 more minutes a day to become respectable to look for work, that's an hour and 15 minutes a week. It's 5 hours a month. It's 60 hours a year. It is 1 full work week a year. So here we were, higher bar, right? More work at home, more expected of us. Oh, wait, I forgot. We don't have a mandated paid parental leave, certainly not maternity leave, us in Papua New Guinea. We don't have a universal sick leave if needed. We don't have affordable childcare. And so when the pandemic took us back into the home, it was women whose careers ended up suffering. Well, why? Well, you only make 80 cents to my dollar. It only makes sense for you to have the choice of leaving the workforce, which is no choice. And so what we saw in the pandemic, and I'm sure all of you have read about this, is women firstly are more represented in the services industries. So their lives were at risk to a greater extent, or they lost their jobs when businesses shut down. When women retreated into the home, we took on even more of the childcare responsibilities, and all of us have been on Zoom calls where women have got the little kids hanging off of them. Men's productivity went up 50%. Women's productivity, and you read for a while, thank goodness they stopped, the articles where men were like, I'm getting to work out more, and I'm getting to have dinner with my family. And women are like, I'm getting to do more childcare. Save me, SOS written on the windows. Though I do love my children for sure. And so men's productivity has been up 50%, women's down about 30%. And men today are being promoted at 3 times the rate of women. And so, we sit here when we thought we were making progress, and decades worth of progress has collapsed within the space of months, indeed weeks. And yet we still sort of stubbornly scratch our heads when the new jobs numbers were not what we expected. You go and you read, well, there must be a reporting thing. Maybe too many people are making, too much in unemployment benefits. You're like, hello, there are millions of women out of work who don't have the childcare in order to come back into the workforce. And if we want this economy to go, then we need to provide them with the support in order for them to go into the workforce.
Thank you. Yes, and I wonder if you might comment on sort of the second part of my question was maybe how does this fit with your mission and Ellevest's your vision for Ellevest? If a short comment on that.
Well, I'll start going on that for hours, for goodness sake. So some of you probably, when you heard Ellevest, oh my gosh, it started as an investing platform, digital. We added private wealth. We've now added coaching, learning, banking to it, built by women. We're 75% women, 50% people of color, with women in mind. And many of you probably said that is about the stupidest business idea I've ever heard. Because obviously money is gender neutral. And so why do women need their own thing? And by the way, the reason women don't invest as much as men do, that why we have the gender wealth gap, part of which is women aren't investing as much, is because women are risk averse. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows women aren't as good at math. Everybody knows women aren't as good at investing. Everybody knows women don't like investing. Everybody knows women need more financial education. None of those things are true except for the last. Everybody needs more financial education regardless of one's gender. Women are not more risk averse than men. Women are more risk aware and want to understand the risk before it's taken. And so I looked at this and said, I started with, this is a dumb idea, and then went to wait a second, maybe women don't invest as much as men do because it's their fault, or maybe in an industry where 99% of investment dollars are managed at companies owned by white men, and 98% of mutual fund dollars are managed by men, and 90+% of traders are men, and 86% of financial advisors are men. And by the way, I love men. I've been married to a couple of them. They're amazing. But maybe a business so overwhelmingly populated by men built a business for themselves. Maybe the buy low, sell high, Bitcoin, large cap value, New York Stock Exchange trading, the game of, we talk about Robinhood's gamifying investing. It's been gamified for forever, right? Maybe that game, CNBC is ESPN for money. Maybe that appeals more to men than women. Maybe it's not women's fault. Maybe we should just build something around what women look for. And so we started, and our underlying mission is to get more money in the hands of women. And the reason is because, as you mentioned in the intro, nothing bad happens when women have more money, like literally nothing. Like literally, and some smarty now, if I said name one thing, usually when we're together, somebody will say, oh, they spend it. Like, yes, they grow the economy. Exactly. But society's fairer, families are fairer, daughters are better off, sons are better off, the other people are better off, men, because women spend money at their business. And very importantly, and particularly today, money is women's number one source of stress. And the act of saving, investing, doing something about it is the number one driver of her confidence in her future. And so many women's magazines and publications, physical wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, all super important. They tend to leave out financial wellness, which is the foundation. And so at Ellevest, if we can help women invest more, save more, earn more at work, then we are not only making her life quite a bit better, we're actually improving society.
Yeah. So clearly you highlighted some of the COVID, potentially some lasting effects of COVID on our economy and our society, particularly with respect to inequality. And I'm wondering if you can tell me what you think the post-COVID world will look like, how it will look different than the pre-COVID one, and are there things that we should be doing right now to ensure better outcomes in that post-COVID world?
Yeah, a few things. So if we go back to the issues we were touching on before, I think we as a country confuse expenses with investments. And we think of maternity leave or parental leave as being an expense and something that money goes out and I just spent it. Gee, those graspy moms. It is in fact an investment. And it is an investment that research has shown pays off for itself in less than a year. And for those of you who have finance degrees, and me as a former CFO, you find an investment that pays in less than a year, you just, how much more of that can I do? And you're like, how can it pay for itself? It pays for itself because if women and men are allowed to be at home with their child, naturally, a biological child, an adopted child, a sick child, if they're allowed to take that time, they're then more likely to come back to work. Whereas if they don't have it, the child, there's something wrong with the child, they quit, okay? If they quit, obviously a business needs to find a replacement and train a replacement, which costs multiple times what a parental leave cost. And so I think we need to stop thinking about these things as expenses. Same with early, childhood education as well. What an investment in, our future generations and in our parents today. And so we're seeing some movement in the Biden administration where these are really being seen as infrastructure investments, and indeed they are. And so I'm hopeful for the first time in a long time, because it is bipartisan, that both parties, are in favor of parental leave. I can tell you at Ellevest, even though we're a startup, we have 12 weeks leave. We started, by the way, with 12-week primary caregiver leave, 8-week non-primary caregiver. And then we said, wait a second, we know what this means. It's code for women and men. And, if we give women more than men, aren't we going to have a mommy track at Ellevest the same way everybody else does? Let's give the same amount to all genders. And by the way, both my male co-founder and our male CTO took the full lead as well. So we tried to be representative from the top. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see some public policy moves for the first time in a long time that can shore up, this social safety net. I'm hopeful. I think companies need to be very careful and thoughtful here, because this move to greater flexibility in remote work can be such a positive for all of us, right? That we, don't have to do that Mad Men 1966 march to the 9:30 meeting and leave at 5 and be at the desk and all that stuff. The concern is that if not done correctly, that you have the haves who are in the office and have-nots who are out of the office, where these folks are being part of the workplace chatter, these folks are not. And so, I think we can all imagine that we could see that split by gender. And so we at Ellevest, we're not there yet, but are trying to be really thoughtful about coming through this. Are we going to be flexibility first or flexibility friendly? And how do we make sure we don't lose anybody along the way? So it has an opportunity at this moment to be enormously positive. I won't say for women, for people to have that flexibility, unless done wrong, in which case it could, just underscore the discrepancies in achievement at work that we've seen historically.
I think you're absolutely right. And I can tell you from doing that research that 20 years of research on remote work suggests that it does not have any negative impact on productivity. In fact, it increases productivity, but it does have a negative impact on career development. And so if it ends up being men in the office and women at home, then remote work may actually be a thing for women's development. You highlighted earlier, though, some of the success stories, and particularly we do see far more female CFOs in American corporations today, which is one of the things that you mentioned just a few minutes ago. But women and minority-run firms currently manage only 1.1% of American assets, and NYU Stern's Center for Business and Human Rights is evaluating the diversity of the asset management firms that direct the $500 billion in assets held by university endowments to develop strategies for diversifying them. You also were highlighting the lack of diversity in asset management. Mm-hmm. What are the barriers to women in the investment management industry, and how do you think we overcome?
Well, it's interesting. So I think there are a few. And I do not want to blame the victim here. I would note that in U.S. households today, little boys are still being taught, grow up to be CEO, watch daddy invest, go to the top of the jungle gym. Little girls today, be careful, don't get your dress dirty, watch mommy coupon clip, watch mommy budget. Wouldn't it be great if you become a vice president or something? Today in schools, little boys get better grades in math for the same answers as little girls. Today at home, in only a single-digit % of households does the mother take the lead in investing, and a small double-digit % is it jointly done. So the messages girls receive is we're the treasurers of the household, whereas the men are the CFOs. When we grow up, and now that I'm about to tell you this, you cannot unsee it, there's a ton of male money media. CNBC, Bloomberg, Crane, some of the Barron's, when I talked to the publisher there, is 96% of their readership is male. Okay. So there's lots of it. It's all about making money and expansiveness and growth. And for women, there's no female money media. There are a few, there's some communities out there about it, some of which sort of boil it all down into a meme. Okay, fine. But then when you look at where articles are being published to women about money in the mainstream media, something like 2/3 are negative. Financial planning doesn't have to be really, really hard. I guess just really hard. And the other third splits between patronizing, take this money quiz, and negative and gaslighting. Like, don't buy the latte, invest the money instead. Don't have the facial, all of which is code word for women. Don't buy the latte. Nobody's telling the men, don't buy the T-bone steak, don't have the personal electronic. And so we're like, oh my gosh, it's me. I'm buying too many lattes. No, you're only getting paid 82 cents to a white man's dollar. Okay. And the debt that you took out has a higher interest rate, even though you have the same FICO score. And so we're sort of being gaslit into, we are dumb. It's hard. We're dumb, whatever. So when you talk to men about money, what comes to mind is power, strength, and independence. And you talk to women about money and it's loneliness, isolation, uncertainty. And women, there's no amount of money women make we don't feel ashamed of. And so money becomes a source of shame for us. So we are not as likely to go into venture capital, a money business. We are not as likely to go to Wall Street or to the investing industry, money business. When we get there, the point of view, which is incorrect, is that we then leave. And actually, that's not what happens. When we get there, if we're in investing, we are better investors than men. I'm just going to flat out say it. The research, and we're certainly not worse. And the research says we're better at or as good at hedge fund investing, mutual fund investing, individual investing. Quite a bit of that is because we don't trade as much. So we don't incur the fees or the taxes or give ourselves as many opportunities to make mistakes. So we are as good or better. And it's not that we leave, and it's not that we have families, and it's not that it's tough. It's that we don't get promoted. And the research is showing this. In fact, David Solomon at Goldman says that's what they found, is that women get stuck at the bottom. So what do? We got to just promote them. We already know, I don't want to take down the standards. No. We already talked. The research says the standards are higher, right? So you're actually raising the bar through diversity. So there's sort of a just do it. Unfortunately, the CEOs are saying it. And then middle management is where diversity goes to die, because these very well-meaning individuals just keep promoting people like themselves, because that is the most comfortable thing in the world, to work with people like yourself. The board of directors sort of have the diversity day, but haven't forced it. And then, of course, the outside, the pension plans and the endowments, everybody wants more diverse managers, but where's your track record? And so you get stuck in this catch-22 of, you can't manage money until you have a track record. You can't have a track record until you manage money. And so women run around with tiny amounts of money. And by the way, even for those where there's sort of special services, we're going to do a special emerging manager thing. You don't even graduate. You have to go through the whole shtick again, as you grow. And so I cannot tell you how many women I talk to who just can't get the money raised. And yet, men, the network works and they mentor each other and they promote each other, and they've been able to, grow the business. Again, I don't think it's ill-meaning. And I think the other thing is that when we think of money managers, we think of men. And so it just feels natural, as opposed to women. There's sort of but is she good at math?
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that I think, so you're kind of highlighting women really not being part of that whole world. And I think one of the positive things that has come out of COVID is, at least in the early months, we saw an explosion of people being involved in investment and sort of entering and investing on their own behalf. Perhaps the PPP has given them resources that they didn't have, and they're looking for ways to gain from it. And Robinhood, which you mentioned earlier, has been kind of a beneficiary. They claim to be democratizing investment. I've had a 58% increase in the women involved, but that's from such a tiny base because it is predominantly male. Women tend to stereotypically take a more holistic approach to wealth planning, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Broader and more long-term goals, which is at odds with Robinhood's ethos, but it's very consistent with kind of the whole principle of sustainable finance, which we're hearing so much about. What do you see as the consequences of empowering women investors for our economy and for individual investors in particular?
Okay, let's back up. You heard me scream. You heard my scream of anguish as you were speaking, because I want to, just as we said, let's not confuse investments with expenses. I also want to be very clear about trading versus investing. Okay, these are two very different things. So investing, invest in a diversified investment portfolio, have an appropriate asset allocation, diversify a little bit out of every paycheck, no active trading. We all know a significant number of people who have invested their way to a secure retirement. If we were together, I'd say start yelling out, please, the number of people who have traded their way to a secure retirement. And yes, there are hedge fund managers who have done it. There are professionals who have done it. Here's the problem with trading. The problem with trading is that you are essentially making a bet that the market has mispriced a security or range of securities or asset class, okay? And so you say, gosh, there are, I should do the count at some point, tens of thousands of Wall Street traders, portfolio managers, research analysts, assistants who do this full time, who went to business school to do this, who had undergrad degrees to do this and have done it for decades. And all day long, they spend only thinking about what securities are mispriced. Here comes me. Hey, everybody. I've got a full-time job myself, but I really think the travel stocks are mispriced. And I'm going to now trade it in my few minutes of time. Okay. What percent of active managers outperform the market consistently over a 5-year period? So again, it's these people who do it full time. That's their full-time job. What percent of them actually do it successfully, consistently over 5 years? The answer is 0.1%. And so somehow I, as an individual investor, I'm going to open up an account, we won't say where, and begin to trade. And that is going to turn out well for me, right? Oh, sure. In a bull market, it may. Just like when you go to Vegas, you can hit the jackpot several times, right? In a more normal market, we will see, and certainly in a declining market. It sort of feels like every generation has their version of day traders, whether it's crypto, whether it's GameStop or whatever. In the late 1990s, there were people who stayed up. The difference this time is the friction is even less. And so I am 1,000% for investing. I'm 500% for trading if you can afford to lose it. I am against the money you need for your security to be trading that. I think that is an absolute fool's game. And investing, it's so counterintuitive, because investing, if you have a long-term perspective and you can invest for 10 or 15 years, which is what you should have if you invest in the equity markets. If you had invested on any day in the US equity markets since the 1920s and had left your money there for 15 years, your chances of a positive return were 99%. If you'd invested a bit out of every paycheck, like Ellevest recommends, your chances were probably 100%. So in investing, the less you do, the more successful you historically have been. I know there's an entire industry that's set up for it. And by the way, those fees essentially come out of your returns, right? So the fact that they are successful does not mean necessarily that you are successful all the time. And it's another place where lower fees tend to lead to higher returns. And we're so taught that more expensive is better. But in this case, hedge funds, the most expensive, 2 and 20, outperform by about 2 and 20, right? So I worry about bored young people with low barriers to entry who trade and have had some wins because of our bull market, who think this is the ticket for them. I do worry. Everyone's like, hey, grandma, right, grandma?
But perhaps empowering women investors might actually not.
Well, investing for women and men, 1,000%.
Right.
Investing. And as I mentioned, is the number one driver of their confidence in their future. And historically, because women have invested less than men have, not traded, but invested less than men have, even adjusted for the gender pay gap, it's cost women hundreds of thousands, for some women, millions of dollars over the course of their lives. And the gender difference has actually been, not that women are more risk averse, there's been a difference that women tend to have thought of the stock market as doing this, when in fact it did that. Mm-hmm. And so for whatever reason, again, because of the articles that come towards us, we remember those downturns in such an outsized way that we think of it as more of a crapshoot than investing has really historically been.
Yeah, losses loom larger than gains, and we need to get past that.
Right.
And you're risk averse. So one last question for me before I open it up to the questions from our audience. NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business has recently published an amazing meta-analysis available on our website, showing that 58% of studies demonstrate a positive relationship between ESG and corporate financial performance, and 36% of studies show a positive relationship between ESG and alpha. Ellevest offers impact portfolios and is embedding ESG into its investment strategies. I wonder if you could talk about how Ellevest is embedding ESG.
Yeah, what a great topic. And it actually leads us back to women. There's a bit of a dated study that says that something like 86% of women are interested, at least in learning about the impact their money is having. But something like a single-digit percent of traditional financial advisors have ever spoken to them about it. And we see that just as we all want meaning in our work, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Ys, whatever's in there, and women really also want impact in their investing. P.S. as a side note, if you're sort of like, well, I don't know about that, my money having an impact, let's be perfectly clear, your money has an impact. Just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact. Doesn't mean it does have an impact. And so it really is almost in a way recognizing and quantifying the impact. One other thing I'll say before talking about Ellevest, which you're kind enough to ask about, is if you were looking for a few questions to see if your financial advisor is keeping up with the times, ask him or her about investing for impact, ESG investing. And if he or she replies, well, you have to give up return, then you can say, oh my gosh, 1984 wants its investment philosophy back. Because, as you've just pointed out, when we believe there is no reason to have to give up return in order to have a positive impact, that quite the opposite, and I wasn't familiar with these studies, but these investing for good, whether it's environmental, social, governance, diversity, reduces risk, and therefore over time can increase return. And we saw that certainly, during the pandemic period. So at Ellevest, it was important to us to make this offer for our women, and we do it in different ways across the wealth spectrum. For our digital clients, many of whom are starting out. I mean, we have clients actually at Ellevest from 18 to 106. Literally, every once in a while, we check to make sure our 106-year-old is still with us, and she is. But with our ETF portfolios on the digital side, we have ETFs that you can choose a portfolio, which the last time I checked was outperforming actually the core portfolio that have environmental and social positive impacts. When, in our private wealth business, we take it even a step further, which an intentional impact portfolio, as we call it, which is all about the gender lens. And what we find is when you invest putting women first, you actually invest putting a number of terrific things first. Like, what do I mean? So it isn't just, does this company have a woman CEO? It is, does this company, are they doing good things for the environment? Because if the environment deteriorates, it hurts everybody. It hurts women more, right? Does the company have good data privacy policies? Because, when there are data privacy issues, it hurts everybody. It hurts women more. Last summer, we brought this out about a year and a half ago. Last summer, when there was a renewed move for social justice, we said, oh my gosh, let's go look and see about whether we've got an anti-racist lens, because you can't be about advancing women if you're not actively anti-racist. Went back and we looked, and in many ways, we did have that because, with the environmental racism being such an issue and cause of concern. But we did take the extra step of divesting from the private prison and, infrastructure, the word I'm looking for. Industrial complex. I found it. And then we go even further for clients where we can put money in women-run startups, where we can put their money to fix up real estate in an environmentally sensitive way and provide that as housing for women in transition. So really, we look to do this across the wealth and investing sophistication spectrum. We really think this is the way that the investing industry goes, and in a way to further engage women and millennials that the big firms are only now waking up to.
So a question from our audience that I think is such a great question related to what you're talking about, and definitely that I resonate with as the mother of 3 daughters, is what resources and actions do you suggest to women who want to help their daughters while they're in their teens learn how to be confident about money and investing?
Yeah, it is such a great question. And my answer is probably going to surprise you. I really don't think it matters what you tell them. I don't. I think it matters what you show them. And that if they see mom, at the end of the day, looking at the brokerage statement, if they see mom talking with dad about whether they should refinance the mortgage, if they see mom, prepping in front of the mirror for the raise, if they see mom, really important, come home, she didn't get the raise. She got, and 6 months later, she got fired, and she sees mom and goes through it with them. I mean, a gift that I gave my children was that when I was invited to leave Bank of America, I came home and wept in the middle of the house. And my kids saw it. And then they saw me. I was going to say, get out. And I gave myself a day of self-pity. I like to do that when I have a bad thing happen, a day of me and self-pity me, and I feel sorry for me. But the next day, they saw me call every member of the board of directors of Bank of America and say, thank you for the opportunity to run Merrill Lynch. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. What could I have done better? And that then they saw me later that week out having lunch and doing things. And so then failure doesn't become such a scary thing. It becomes part of life. Dealing with money isn't a weird thing. It's part of life. And by the way, there's a little bit from kids and towards couples. There's research that says that the more often couples talk about money, the happier they are. That if couples talk about money once a week, something like 78 or 80% report being happy. Whereas if you only talk about it every 6 months, it's a minority. And I don't know where my chicken is or where my egg is, which leads to which. But talking about money is sort of a sexy thing, apparently, and a healthy thing as well when it comes to families.
As long as it's not fighting about money.
Well, and there's that. And my parents did, which is sort of why I went to Wall Street, because I'm like, I don't want to ever fight about money. I want to make money. But it can't I think a little letting the kids see some friction is not so bad, right? And then the resolution of the friction in a way that they can understand.
So a question that came up in response to earlier on, you talked about your experience when, the guys you were working with were saying, it took me, I woke up 15 minutes ago and you said I've been up for an hour. And the question is how senior women should handle these many these situations where they're confronted with, how do you handle comments like that? How do you handle sort of those difficult situations and proving your worth in a context that, let's face it, you were constantly your entire career in environments where you've had to fight for everything that you've gotten in.
For sure. For sure. Well, look, I think we just need to talk about it more and normalize it. It was interesting because with my career, watching the press that I'd had, when I started, the press liked me. And then I was at Citi, and all of a sudden I was this terrible bitch. And I'm like, my gosh, I guess I had a personality transplant and difficult to work and all this stuff. And then I got booted out of Citi, because my boss and I had a difference of opinion on how we should treat client losses. I thought we'd missold products. We should partially reimburse them. All of a sudden the press loves me. Then I'm back running Merrill and I'm a bitch again. And not only a bitch, but like a cold, icy, terrible bitch. And then I got fired and everybody likes me again. And, and then I got surprised because when I started Ellevest, I thought, well, this is a great thing. And then I had some of my women, journalist friends who were like, this is a horrible idea. She's going to fail. And, and just attack. And you're like, what? And we so don't know what to do with successful women that it's almost natural that we pull them down. And I have to tell you, I'm sorry if I'm being way too honest and blunt, but, I watched this generation of women entrepreneurs who are the generation after me, who all are on the cover of these magazines and, raising big amounts of venture capital. And really one of them, she was on the cover of a magazine, she had a party for herself. And I'm like, gosh, when I used to be, when that happened to me, I'd be like, nobody look at me, because I don't want too much attention or people think I'm a bitch. And I thought, well, this is just so refreshing and so wonderful. But yet they've still been taken down. And, there was a rash of women CEOs getting knocked out of their jobs this summer. And for all the reasons, when you read it and the being too tough on employees or racist or making racist comments, you're like, that absolutely makes sense. But what is a little odd to me is it was all women. There weren't very many men at all. And so maybe women are much more terrible than men, but I don't know. And there was almost a gleefulness about it, that occurred. And so I worry about that. And I think we have to talk about it and point it out and normalize it. And then within the workplace, I think there's a decision we all have to make about, what we call out and what we fight and what we save our ammo for. And obviously, you graduate from Stern, you go to work the first day, you don't want to be knocking on the CEO's office and saying, we really need to get that, gender pay gap report out, buddy. But when you get to a certain level, historically, women have really been socialized into becoming queen bees, which is I made it to the top and I'm not going to help women, who follow me. And it was an economic decision because if there was only one seat at the table for a woman and you wanted it, don't let anybody else come on up. But where we got, I think, again, gaslit is that men have always played the business game as a team sport where they promote each other, they talk each other up, they throw each other business, they put each other on the boards. And women have really, instead played as an individual sport. You buy Lean In, you buy Know Your Worth, you buy this book, you buy Own It. I wrote one. And you sort of go through the checklist of how to be successful solo. And it's done a real disservice for women where we've, and I've heard it something, better not promote another woman because they'll think it's just because she's a woman. But boy, it's safe to promote someone who's like the majority. And so I think we all have to think as we become more senior, how much of the, how much of the wheel we want to break. And I want to break the wheel. I want to break the wheel so much I started a company that is focused on doing it. And frankly, because I think you can affect change much more quickly these days through a startup than you can at a big company. That with a startup, with social media, you can get a message out, you can start to affect change. At a big company, depending on the company, sometimes you're you have to have 6 committee meetings before you even set up the meeting to talk about the problem.
No wonder you started a company. So a question here is about the role of universal basic income or some kind of guaranteed minimum income. And the question is what do you think of that as providing women with a foundation for economic security?
Yeah, and so this is a personal opinion, and it is not a, frankly, particularly informed opinion because I'm not a public sector expert, public policy expert. I'm in business, but I have to tell you, I am becoming so much more liberal the older I get. Where I really think we need to be investing. We invest so much in our elderly, whom we love. We invest so little in our children, who are our future. And it is so backwards. And if we could just let all the toddlers vote, then maybe they would start to vote for themselves. If, I love that young people are out and voting more because it was something where young people didn't vote and let the old people vote and vote, for themselves. I think it is an absolute travesty that in the richest country in the history of the world, that we have children in poverty. I think it is a travesty that we are saddling this generation with so much student loan debt that they can't get out from under. I think it's a travesty that our educational system is as poor as it is. And so by the way, I was a registered Republican. I came from South Carolina, and I'll march on any. If there's a march, I'm marching these days. As I grow older, these inequalities, I believe in reparations. If you look at how this country was built on the back of Black slaves, and that racial wealth gap continues to open because we never gave them a leg up, versus the leg up that we gave to white people. So I wouldn't listen to me because I'm all the way over here these days.
And the truth is that banking, lending, housing, that's been implicated very severely in the inequalities that we're seeing. So there's a lot.
Racial and gender, and that is why that wealth gap is opening, both the racial wealth gap and the gender wealth gap. The financial services industry has contributed to it. And yes, it is things like redlining. It's things like women couldn't hold a credit card without their husband's permission until the 70s. But it's also things like, higher interest rates for, underrepresented groups, even if the FICO scores don't indicate it. And even more subtly, investment minimums. Investment, if it, in Merrill, you have a $250,000 minimum. You have Merrill Edge, you had like a $5,000 minimum. Those are sexist and racist. They just are, because if you don't have the money to start investing, which is why at Ellevest, we have no you can invest a penny. I can't give you a diversified investment portfolio for less than $1, but we were very much about democratizing that access.
Yeah. So I have a question here from Suresh Sani, who is Ashok Sani's nephew. And his question is, in addition to investing skills, do you think Ellevest or another new business should help women develop skills to succeed in business, like make it like a team sport versus an individual sport?
We are. What a great idea. It's really interesting because we surveyed women as other companies survey women. And if you ask women, what is your greatest money want? What do you want help with from a financial company? Women are actually very clear. Women say, I want to earn more at work. And so what the industry does, and by the way, I ran these businesses, they say, oh, okay, would you like a high interest rate checking account? And when we're like, okay, sure. And this is where there's a gender difference, because women, we tend to think about, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, we tend to think more holistically. So when we're thinking about money, we're actually not thinking typically in those buckets, right? We're thinking, how do I have more? Okay, well, let's start with earn more. Mm-hmm. Let's go with, pay off credit card debt. let's go with save more, let's go with invest. And so it's the spectrum. And so we are I think the only one I know of. Not only do we have financial advisors, certified financial planners, and money coaches, we now have executive coaches. And what's really so interesting about this is they reflect our community. So even when Citi gave me an executive coach, was someone who looked a lot like my dad, who I adore. And we would sit in my office and I'd say, I'm really struggling with this. And he's like, well, you should go in and you should do it. I'm like, that's not going to work. You should tell him. And I'm like, that's not going to work. And so we have executive coaches who reflect our community, because the issues that women face in the workforce are different than men. And the issues that Black women face are different from white women. Brown women face are different from Black, and the different, and so trying to be very inclusive, for sure. So yeah, we're there.
Is great to hear, I think, for all of us. So here's a question about, so Ellevest has entered the consumer banking market. And the question is, does Ellevest plan to sign on as a signatory to the UN's Principles for Responsible Banking, or join the Global Alliance for Banking on Balance?
It's a good question. So we are not a bank per se. We do not have a banking license. We offer debit cards and, checking accounts. Debit cards and save accounts. So we're not a bank per se, but we are ready to sign on to almost anything that drives greater fairness in our industry and therefore for our society.
All really good to hear. So here's a question, I think, inspired by your story about the coach. So do you recommend coaching for fresh grads for their future success?
Yes, everybody can use a coach. Michael Jordan had a coach, right? Michael, that's all you got to know. That, for any of us, having a third party with whom you have a connection, with whom you feel like you get along is important. But there's a lot of work that has to be done on your side. And just as with any kind of coaching, being brutally honest about yourself is imperative. And, I still find, so many folks, you give them constructive feedback and they're immediately defensive, immediately backpedaling. And just remember, that it's in your company's interest and your interest for you to be successful. And so making sure to gather that feedback. And I know it hurts, believe me, getting through the hurt and then doing the real hard work is the way to success. And by the way, one thing I'll say, which sounds so trite, but is true, there is no success without failure. There just isn't. No, it's unfair, but it just isn't. And while when you were kind enough to provide my intro, you talk about the senior jobs I have. You also didn't bring up the fact that I had been fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice. And, I wish I hadn't been. It wasn't any fun. It was sort of embarrassing. It hurt a lot. It still hurts. But I took the decision a long time ago that I would rather have a career where I took risks, thoughtful risks, reasoned risks that I felt like had much better chance of working out in my favor than not. But I would rather go for it and try to run a Smith Barney. What? Or a Merrill Lynch, what? And have the risk of in going for it, that risk I was taking, that I would stumble. I'd rather have both of those than, as an old boss of mine said, why don't you just cross the street in a pack? I'm like, I don't want to cross the street in a pack. I want to cross the street by myself. And sometimes you get hit. You pick yourself up and you move on.
I have to tell you that, so I was familiar with the academic literature that's shown that failure is more stigmatizing for women than it is for men. Yep. But I have to say that you've given me a very different way of looking at that, where it sounds like it's more stigmatizing because we let it be. And that the right approach is the one that you took, which is just, I own it. And I know you wrote the book on that, but, to own it and move on. And yeah.
But it's almost, if you and I had several drinks at this stage, and we were to get deep into, being feminist together, we could say this is the patriarchy, right? If you're embarrassed, if it's so stigmatizing to fail, then you're not going to try as hard. And so it can hold a person back. But, for me, it was a recognition of a couple things. First of all, nobody cares. This whole, they're talking about me, maybe for 10 minutes, but nobody cares. And the second thing is we've all won the jackpot. We have. And so once you realize that you won the jackpot, and if you fail, we are all fortunate enough that there's still dinner on the table that night, then you sort of owe it to yourself, but very importantly to our community and society to go for it, right? That if you, all of you, the education you've had, the privileges you've had, that if you were to say, I failed, I'm going to sit back, in a way, you're squandering the privilege that you've been given. So it's, I think, a responsibility to keep going.
Yeah. And if women in this generation do that, then we will be making it easier for women in subsequent generations. Here's a great question. What should gay fathers, single fathers, what should fathers do for their daughters?
Yes, I love that. So the research tells us that the most important relationship that successful professional women typically have had has been with their father. And that breaks my heart for women who have not had that stable relationship with that most important man. Obviously, so many are successful, but women who get that leg up have that leg up. And you sort of know it, the most important man in your life unconditionally loves you, right? And tells you to go. And the moment for me, I remember, and I told this story in my book, in third grade, I had to get glasses and they were awful. But I chose, it was the 70s, late 70s, and I chose yellow tinted glasses. It somehow made my eyes look quite enormous. And obviously got made fun of at school the first day, and came home and was in tears and said, and my dad, why are you crying? And I said, I don't want to have glasses. And he said, but I have glasses. And I said, but I want to be pretty. And I'll never forget, my dad said, Gloria Steinem wears glasses. Gloria Steinem is gorgeous. And Gloria Steinem is changing the world. And my dad gave me permission, right, through that to be a feminist, to be beautiful with my glasses on, and that stability. And so, look, I mean, when you tell your kid you can do anything you want, you're lying to them. And so you want to be a little careful with that, because a Black friend of mine said, white women are told you can do everything. And then we're like, I'm so surprised I can't do everything. And they said, no, we know it's going to be tough from the beginning. So I think you want to be a little careful with you can do anything, but working to give your daughter a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, right? Praising that effort as opposed to praising the grades, and just letting her know that there's an unconditional love. When I was, when I first got to Wall Street, and I was, the young men were trying to force me out of there. They were putting, Xerox copy, pictures of male genitalia on my desk as a means of bullying me and embarrassing me. And, at the end of the day, I'd be like, yeah, but my dad, none of you hold a candle to my dad. My dad loves me and believes in me. And it's just important.
So our last question, given that we've only got a minute left, is what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self if you could go back in time?
Don't marry your first husband. Stop. Just don't. Stop. That would be it. And then I'm sure it would be all the work hard and keep on trucking. And, there's bias everywhere. If you look for it, it will drive you over the edge. But choose your battles and choose ones that are important and meaningful as well. And that you have, as you go through life, you have a responsibility, given the privilege and advantages you've had, to do work that betters others, not just makes money.
And you certainly have chosen your battles and chosen them wisely and have made a huge difference. Thank you so much, Sallie, for joining us tonight and for honoring the legacy and memory of Ashok Sani and for illuminating all of us with your insights. It's been terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the Sani family.
Good night.